At 2:14 in the morning, 17 contacts appear on the destroyer's surface search radar simultaneously. Not aircraft, not missiles, boats, 17 of them, spreading across the radar picture from bearing 047 in a formation the Combat Information Center has never seen outside of a war game. Not the loose, opportunistic scatter of pirates. Not the disorganized rush of a militia patrol boat ambush. A deliberate geometric arc, fanning outward across 140 degrees of bearing with a precision that no undisciplined force produces in the dark. The northern contacts pushing wide to cut off the escape route. The southern contacts mirroring them. The central cluster, 8 boats, holding a direct, unwavering bearing on the ship. Every contact exactly maintaining its interval. The formation holding its shape with a coherence that means one thing. These boats are not acting independently. They are executing a coordinated plan, and that plan has been waiting in the water for exactly this ship on exactly this night. The officer of the deck calls away general quarters. The commanding officer is on the bridge in 90 seconds. At 35 knots, 17 contacts cover 11 miles in under 20 minutes. The clock is already running. To understand why what is unfolding in the darkness is so dangerous, you need to understand what a swarm is actually designed to do to a warship. Modern destroyers are built to kill at distance. Long-range missiles, advanced fire control radar, layered air defense. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyer is one of the most lethal surface combatants ever constructed. Against a peer warship at 20 miles, or an incoming missile at altitude, it operates from a position of overwhelming advantage. Its sensors reach further than any adversary can see. Its weapons engage before any adversary can close. Swarm tactics exist specifically to make that advantage irrelevant. The logic is deliberate. Replace one expensive, detectable threat with many small, fast, cheap ones. Force the defender to make 17 decisions simultaneously instead of one. Compress the engagement timeline until the defender's systems, and the humans running them, begin to saturate under the weight of parallel choices. The swarm does not need to be more powerful than the destroyer. It needs to be more numerous. It needs to arrive faster than the crew can process. It needs to turn the ship's defensive layers from a wall into a sieve. The 17 contacts now, closing on the destroyer, are executing textbook swarm geometry. The flanking elements have already cut off the primary maneuvering corridors north and south. The central cluster is not deviating. At 11 miles, the Combat Information Center begins its identification process. Speed, size, radar cross-section, movement correlation. Bridge to bridge, radio hailing goes out on maritime emergency frequencies. No response. At 9 miles, the electronic warfare team reports something that changes the calculus entirely. 2 of the contacts are emitting short-pulse radar signatures. Fire control type. Fishing vessels do not carry fire control radar. The commanding officer authorizes weapons-free posture on positively identified threats. This is where the scenario becomes brutal. Not because of the firepower bearing down on the ship, but because of the decision the crew is now required to make before any of that firepower can be used. The Arabian Sea is one of the busiest maritime corridors on the planet. Tanker traffic, fishing dhows, commercial vessels move through these waters around the clock, around the calendar, in every weather condition. Rules of engagement governing U.S. naval forces in international waters require positive identification before lethal engagement. That is not a bureaucratic obstacle. It is a legal and moral framework built on hard historical lessons about the catastrophic cost of error at sea. It means that between the 17 contacts on the radar picture and the order to open fire, there is an identification requirement that the crew must satisfy under time pressure measured in minutes. So the Combat Information Center is now running multiple processes in parallel. The radar team is classifying every contact by speed, size, and maneuvering pattern. The electronic warfare operators are building a signature picture of which contacts are emitting and what those emissions indicate. The communications team is continuing to hail on every available frequency, and the commanding officer is evaluating a course change to narrow the ship's profile and maximize the engagement arcs of its defensive systems. 5 miles. The helicopter is launched. It is a calculated risk. Putting aircrew into a 17 contact threat environment at night carries its own danger. But the helicopter solves a problem the ship cannot solve from its own sensors alone. Elevated radar picture. Direct visual identification capability on contacts the ship's radar is merging with surface clutter. Independent engagement capability on the flanking contacts that are pushing hardest toward the ship's beam. The helicopter climbs, banks north, and begins feeding targeting data directly into the Combat Information Center. For miles, the two contacts with fire control emissions are inside the inner engagement envelope. Then one of the contacts opens fire. A rocket-propelled grenade, shoulder-fired, unsophisticated, the kind of weapon that costs almost nothing and exists in every conflict zone in the region. It misses the hull by meters, but it is an unambiguous hostile act, and it crosses the rules of engagement threshold that the crew has been holding against since the first radar contact appeared 43 minutes ago. The commanding officer orders engagement. What follows is what naval analysts call a high-density surface engagement, and it is by any measure one of the most demanding operational environments a surface warfare crew can be placed in. The deck gun shifts from warning shots to direct fire. The close-in weapon system spins up in automatic mode, its radar-guided Gatling cannon slaving to contacts inside the final defensive perimeter. The helicopter overhead is already engaging flanking contacts and streaming real-time targeting data back to the ship. The Combat Information Center is running a prioritization sequence, which contacts are closest, which are emitting, which are on attack headings, processing it all simultaneously while the ship maneuvers at high speed in the dark. 3 miles, 2 miles, two contacts push inside 500 yards. At 500 yards from a destroyer, an adversary does not need precision. They need proximity. The CIWS engages both contacts in automatic mode, operating in the final seconds of the defensive window, which is exactly the scenario the system was designed to handle and exactly the scenario every surface warfare crew hopes never to actually reach. The engagement runs 11 minutes from first hostile act to last contact. When the firing stops, the destroyer has taken fragmentation damage. Minor, the crew is intact. The picture that emerges from the after-action analysis is one that naval planners have been studying for years, because the swarm achieved several of its core tactical objectives, even in defeat. It forced the ship into a reactive posture from the moment of first contact. It compressed the engagement timeline to the point where the final defensive layer, the CIWS, was operating at near minimum range before the threat was neutralized. It generated a simultaneous identification and prioritization problem that the crew had to solve under live fire, in darkness, against a moving threat array. And it did all of that at a cost that asymmetrically favors the attacker. This is the mathematics that makes swarm tactics strategically dangerous beyond any single engagement. A defensive round from a modern naval weapons system costs orders of magnitude more than a small fast attack craft. A CIWS burst costs more than the boat it destroys. Scale that exchange rate across a sustained campaign. Multiple engagements, extended operational tempo, attrition of munition stocks, and the resource calculus begins to shift in ways that favor the force fielding the swarm, not the force defending against it. Naval planners have been working through this arithmetic publicly for years. The 2000 attack on the USS Cole in the port of Aden demonstrated in the starkest possible terms what a single small boat with a shaped charge could do to a guided missile destroyer. 17 sailors killed. The ship nearly lost. 2 men in a fiberglass boat. The scenario in the Arabian Sea on this night is that threat multiplied by 17, coordinated, and executed at sea in open water against a ship at full combat readiness. The question is not whether the U.S. Navy anticipated this threat. The Naval War College has run swarm engagement scenarios extensively. Public Pentagon threat assessments have identified small boat swarm tactics as a priority surface warfare challenge for years. The doctrine, the training pipelines, the weapons system configurations, all of it reflects an institutional awareness that this threat exists and that it must be prepared for. What the war games consistently reveal is that the decisive variables in swarm engagements are not primarily technological. They are procedural and temporal. The crew's general quarters response time in this engagement, under 90 seconds, is the single data point that created every subsequent decision space the crew needed. Every additional minute of warning in a swarm scenario is not linearly valuable. It is exponentially valuable. because the engagement timeline compresses so fast that the difference between 90 seconds and 3 minutes to GQ is the difference between controlled engagement and crisis management. Units that drill rapid response, that train identification procedures under time pressure, that practice parallel processing in the Combat Information Center. Those units do not just survive the compression, they manage it. The helicopter launch solved the information problem that the ship's own sensors could not. Elevated radar picture, visual identification capability, independent flanking engagement. In swarm scenarios, situational awareness at the moment of engagement is the decisive asymmetry, and that awareness has to be built before the first shot is fired, not reconstructed from radar returns after the shooting starts. The weapons discipline the crew maintained throughout the engagement. Warning shots before lethal engagement, identification before the helicopter fired, clear communication between CIC and weapon stations under combat conditions. Reflects doctrine built from historical lessons that cost lives to learn. It does not emerge naturally under stress. It is trained, drilled, and sustained through repetition until it holds even when everything else is breaking down around it. 2 contacts reached 500 yards. That number is what stays in the after-action analysis, not the 17 initial contacts, not the 11-minute engagement duration, not the fragmentation damage the ship sustained. 2 contacts at 500 yards, representing the actual margin between a successful defense and a catastrophic mission kill, is the number that drives the follow-on investment decisions, the doctrine revisions, and the sleepless nights in the surface warfare community. In a scenario where either of those contacts carried a large shaped charge comparable to what was loaded onto the skiff that hit the coal, the CIWS operating at near minimum range in the final seconds of the engagement window might not have been sufficient. The geometry of the failure mode is that tight. This is why the surface fleet has been pushing hard toward directed energy systems. The USS Portland conducted successful laser weapon tests against drone and small boat targets in 2020 and 2021. Publicly documented engagements that validated the technology's viability against exactly the category of threat this scenario represents. Directed energy engages at the speed of light. It costs almost nothing per shot. It does not deplete a finite magazine. Against a 17 contact swarm, a laser system capable of rapid sequential surface engagement addresses the cost asymmetry problem at its root. You are no longer trading a $20,000 round for a $10,000 boat. You are firing a dollar's worth of electricity. That capability is not yet broadly fielded across the surface fleet. The gap between where directed energy technology exists today and where the swarm threat is operating right now. That gap is precisely what this engagement illustrates, and it is a gap the Navy is working against the clock to close. The crew did what trained crews do. They responded fast, maintained discipline, used their systems as designed, and brought their people home. The swarm came in the dark across 17 vectors with coordination and intent. It pushed the ship's defensive layers to their operational limits. It got 2 contacts inside 500 yards, and it still did not win. But the strategic question this engagement raises is not about one ship on one night in the Arabian Sea. It is about what happens when the swarm is 25 contacts instead of 17. When the attacking force has studied this engagement, adapted its geometry, and modified its timing to exploit the specific window between radar detection and CIWS engagement. When the engagement occurs not in open water, but in a choke point where maneuvering room is gone entirely, and the flanking corridors the helicopter covered cannot be covered. When 2 engagements happen simultaneously against 2 ships in the same operational area, the helicopter can only be in one place. The Navy held the line in this engagement because of its crew's training, its layered defensive systems, and margins that were tighter than the final report will reflect. The harder question, whether the doctrine, the technology, and the investment are keeping pace with the threat fast enough and being fielded broadly enough to hold that line every time, is a question that this engagement sharpens without answering. That answer is still being written.